Thank you, Dirk, Dr. Herman, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone for making the time to be here today for this important report launch. As Dr. Herman said, I am Martin van Staden, and I am Head of Policy at the Free Market Foundation. And I'm going to take this opportunity to very briefly provide an overview of race law in South Africa today. Before my colleague, Dr. Morne Malan, really dives into the detail of the costs of South Africa's arguably biggest race law. Dr. Malan did the overriding bulk of the research work from our side, and he was ably assisted by our policy officer, Zakele Mtembu, and our intern and associate, Ayanda Zulu, who is joining us here today with our CEO, David and Sarah. So thank you to the FMF team and our colleagues at Solidarity for all the great work that has been done to go into this report. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not take it just from me that South Africa legislates by race today. Somehow this has become a controversial statement in the last few months, even though before that it was quite agreed upon. Earlier this week in his newsletter, Cyril Ramaphosa said, and I quote, "Since 1994, we have built a robust legislative framework to advance the transformation of our economy, anchored in the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act and the Employment Equity Act," close quote. Ramaphosa also, just a few weeks ago, after returning from the United States, said in Parliament quite bluntly that we will continue to see legislation employing racialized terminology and racialized provisions until South Africa has attained some kind of utopian equality that is undefinable and obviously unattainable in practice. But Ramaphosa is indeed correct that the B-BBEE Act is the anchor for the post-1994 legislative framework of race law. Not only does the Act find application through its various regulations, sector codes, and charters, but it is also regularly cross-referenced and incorporated by reference by other acts of Parliament. To take two very recent examples, the Public Procurement Act, the Property Practitioners Act, and you can think of many others, maybe most notably is the Mineral Development Act, the Mineral Resources Development Act, the CASA Act, and even something as seemingly innocuous as the Intellectual Property Rights from Publicly Financed Research and Development Act. All these incorporate provisions of the BEE Act into their own legislative paradigms. But just to provide a general idea for you, I compiled and I continue to maintain the Index of Race Law on behalf of the South African Institute of Race Relations. The index is intended to, and it does, track the occurrences of Parliament in its legislation, making a person's race, skin color, or ethnicity legally relevant in any way since 1910. So it covers the whole existence of Parliament from its creation, and it covers the eras of segregation, that's up to 1948, the era of apartheid, 1948 to 1994, and today of transformationism, that's 1994 to today. These are very different eras of race law, ladies and gentlemen, but they are all united by one common principle, and that is that they took something over which a person has no control, that they are born with, and they made that a legally relevant consideration. So, since 1910, Parliament has adopted a total of 324, that is 324, acts that fit the criterion of race law. Again, that is legal relevance that is attached to inborn skin color. Of these 324 laws, at least 122, 122, have been adopted since the constitutional transition of 1994. That is about 40% of the total, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, of these 324 acts, 145, that's 145, remain operational in our law today, though 9 of that 145 have been deracialized primarily by the National Party in the last years of its rule. To some of you, these numbers might sound novel, but that is because the Index of Race Law is always being updated, and it really received its latest update this week. And it's no secret, anyone can access this index at racelaw.co.za. And thus far, I am aware of at least 3 mainstream media houses that have subjected the index to stress tests and to fact checks. And although they might wish, bizarrely, that these laws rather be judged on the intentions, the mere and pure intentions of those who adopted the laws, rather than the fact that they are in fact racial laws. Each of these fact checks have found that the index is robust and accurate as far as picking up occurrences of race in law. So, ladies and gentlemen, the extent of race law in South Africa is in fact a far higher number than what I have just given. And that is because the index does not yet take into account the many regulations, codes, and charters which are as binding in law as an act of parliament is. In time, the index will do so, but I just want to get out of the way that only acts of parliament are currently considered in the index. This report considers far more than that. But that means that the numbers I have just given are in fact the bare minimums of race law in South Africa. So the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act, alongside the Employment Equity Act, the Competition Act, and the Public Procurement Act, are in my view the 4 race laws that in practice make it either impossible or nearly impossible for anyone, be they a black person, white person, Indian, colored, or any of the many shades in between, to do substantive business in this country without at some point being called upon legally to account for race, to declare their own race, though they might not want to compel their employees to racialize themselves, though they might not want to, and even to require suppliers, and in some cases even clients, to identify themselves by inborn melanin content, though they might not want to. And these, ladies and gentlemen, are only 4 of many. Only 4 that already in commercial practice and in other realms of life elevate a preoccupation with color appearance over competing considerations of merit, efficiency, growth, and of course, all too often forgotten, morality and ethics. They force those who might want to live and behave as committed non-racialists to sacrifice their conscientious beliefs to the total ideological regimentation of our society according to race by the political elite. And this cost to merit, to efficiency, to morality and ethics is already sufficient today, as it was a century ago, to lead us to insist from this government to abandon its racial enterprise in favor of workable solutions that have been tried and tested all around the world throughout history that have in fact solved poverty, that have in fact reduced inequality, that have in fact led to a redress of past injustice. And what is this, ladies and gentlemen? This is a free market economy based on the rule of law, non-racialism, and that treats people not as items on a spreadsheet, but as individuals who matter, who have their own dignity, their own desires, and their own plans in life that must not necessarily just be rubbished and dismissed as secondary to the agenda of the political elite. But this racial enterprise that the state has embarked upon also has a bare minimum quantifiable cost to our fiscus and to growth. And that is what we are, I think, here today specifically to consider. And that is what Mr. Malan, Mr. Dubison, and Mr. Mulder will get into. Thank you very much.